RPG lessons learned. When the game is over, when your players are gone, that's when lessons are learned.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of RPG Lessons Learned, the show where you can learn from our mistakes. I am Tanner, your often co-host, and I'm here with your main guy, Dusty. Dusty, what's up? How's it going?
Tanner, I cannot complain. How about yourself?
I'm doing great. We are going to talk about our second time playing Mutants and Masterminds. We decided that we wanted to do a 3-part mini campaign, exploring all these dungeons and these systems that we've had over the past year and change. We've done a lot of one-shots, and the last time we really had a continuous story was with Bellman?
Yes.
Is that right?
It is right. And that continuous story just happened to be 2 consecutive dungeons that only had continuity in the sense that they were by the same author in the same system.
Yeah. So we wanted to dig into something a little bit deeper. There's a lot of other systems we want to get to, but we wanted to do a short little campaign to see, what is it like to actually run a system a couple times in a row, which is what most people actually do. So you decided to give us a 3-part story called The Carnival of Crime.
I did. The Carnival of Crime liberally cribbed, I don't know if you noticed this, from a very short-lived superhero show called The Cape.
Oh, I've only ever heard jokes about The Cape, like
It
on
is
Community. Yeah.
It's awful, but I love it. It's so badly good. I love how earnest that show is. The Carnival of Crime were good guys. I am making them bad guys, and I'm not using any actual characters from The Cape. I just love the alliteration of the Carnival of Crime.
It's awesome.
I love the idea of like mimes and clowns and the carnival barkers and food vendors and ride operator being evil.
Yeah, absolutely. They always are. And I guess it's a good time to talk about maybe taking a step back. Playing Mutants and Masterminds, I don't think we ever really talked about what our superhero history is personally, like we've talked before about like what kind of fantasy stuff that we like, but you talked about how you're not really a fan of the Marvel movies, but you really liked comic books growing up and you wanted this to kind of feel like that. So like what are like your greatest hits for like superhero stuff
that's easy
influenced you?
Easy. My grandmother for Christmas one year bought me a trade paperback called Batman, A Lonely Place of Dying.
Uh-huh.
And it was the follow-up to Jason Todd's death. It was the 4-issue series, I think, where Tim Drake becomes the new Robin. And I read that thing over and 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 over. And then, other than that, my love of comics, I never got into a continuous series. I never subscribed to anything. I almost never had, if it's part 1 of 3 or whatever, I almost never had all 3 or all 4. That happened a couple times ever. It was just whatever loose issues I could grab off a newsstand, literally a news rack in a convenience store that we went to called Ricky's near my house was the source of my comics. And I had no loyalty to Marvel or DC. I would grab a Superman. I would grab a Spider-Man. I'd grab whatever had a cool cover.
Yep.
I would grab and then read.
Who would you say is like your favorite, I don't want to say superhero, but super character as far as that goes?
Batman, I can't defend my love for Batman now as an adult. I think Batman is questionable in a lot of ways, and I can get into that if you want. But when I was a kid, Batman, I love how Batman didn't have powers, but was still a total badass and going toe to toe with people who did have powers. So for sure, Batman was my favorite. The whole thing about not being able to defend him as an adult is there are so many more ways for Bruce Wayne to fight crime than Batman.
Yeah, I think that Batman has been cross-examined as a character many, many times by many, many people. And yeah, you're right. He's a billionaire. Just donate to charity. Come on. But no, he's just like, I kind of liked how the newest movie kind of portrayed him as like a unfunctioning psycho in that regard, where it's like, yeah, he's not all right. For me, I grew up watching a lot of the 90s X-Men cartoon. I watched a lot of Static Shock. I watched, I've seen all the MCU movies that I've cared to. And then recently, a big touchstone it's kind of fun that I was playing this like right as you were getting started, as I played a lot of Marvel's Midnight Suns, the video game. Are you aware of this game?
Don't even know.
Okay, it's like it's made by the XCOM developers, and it's a turn-based, card-based RPG that's like 60 hours long, and you like hang out with like Blade and Spider-Man and like an original character, but it's super fun. And like it's for me, who's like very casually aware of all those characters, it was a nice way to get into it. It's like I didn't know who Nico Minoru or the Caretaker or like Ghost Rider was, but like yeah. So I'm a Blade fan. That's my number one. The Wesley Snipes movie, the first Blade 1 and 2, like those are probably the pinnacle of any comic book on live action, I would say.
Dig those movies. Have never actually read a Blade comic.
They're pretty fun. I read one that was Doctor Doom taking Blade back in time to the 1400s to kill the vampires that in his homeland of like Barovia or what? Not Barovia. That's Ravenloft. Whatever his home country is, to make sure that Doctor Doom gets born. It was very fun. But yeah, read some Blade. Blade's awesome.
But yeah, to your point, Mutants and Masterminds is a game in the superhero genre. Let's talk about, also not in the show notes, but we'll go off topic here for a minute. The only game I have played that knocked on the door of the superhero genre, this website called Tribality put out builds for the Avengers. And this came out right at the height of like the original Avengers movie coming out and me being into the MCU. Right at the height of me being interested in it when it was like a cool novel thing to have a superhero movie and not 3 a year. Mm-hmm. Tribality did these builds in 5e for the Avengers.
I remember you talking about that. You brought that to a convention once, didn't you?
I did. I played it with Brian and Mike and Nathan and Chris. And then I also brought it to a convention where it didn't go as well in the convention. But I loved those Tribality builds. They were all level 12 heroes, if I remember correctly. So they were quite powerful builds. And D&D 5th edition, no hatred toward it either, but it might as well be a superhero game.
Sure. At that level, certainly.
Yes. So that felt very superhero, but still grounded in something I knew very well, which is D&D. This is the first true superhero game that I've played.
Same here. So yeah, I think we both are coming at this with some enthusiasm, and I'm glad that you stepped up to run something. It's been awesome.
So Tanner, why don't you rate the adventure that I ran for you on a scale of 1 to 10?
I'm going to give this one a solid 7.5. And that's good. I'm taking 5 as an average. Some people are like 7 as an average. Then what's the point of like 1 through 5, but I really like the setup. Everything felt really fresh and new. I loved the characterizations you did of the NPCs and the villains. The only deduction was from learning the new system and the friction involved in that. There was a part where we had to sit for like 20 minutes and figure out what my stat actually was or meant, or if I was calculating it right. And yeah, that dragged it down a little bit, but nothing against the adventure. But overall, as a session, I'd say 7.5.
So 2 of our 3 total listeners just said to themselves, you should never stop a session to look up a rule. But we had a conversation in the moment to say, we're learning a new system. Let's pause and learn the new system.
Exactly.
Do you stand by that decision, or do you wish we had just moved on?
I don't want to brag. I think I'm a pretty good game master, like all things considered. I always stop and look up a rule. And that kind of goes to the lessons that you learned about me, which is you better know the system if you're running a game for Tanner. And like, I need to glossing over it and maybe doing it wrong and then not being prepared for the next time it comes up always feels worse to me than just taking 2 seconds to look it up. And yeah, you hear advice to the contrary all the time. Maybe what my habit is annoying, but you know what? That's how I prefer to play the game. And honestly, with just 2 people, we're not wasting really anybody's time. It's just us, playing for 1 player and 1 GM. So it really wasn't that big of a deal at all.
And I think you have 2 choices. You can either like learn the system and like have session after session where you just learn the system and then play finally when you're quote unquote ready, or you just pause like a gym teacher in the 5th grade teaching you how to play flag football. You just time out the game as the gym teacher and explain to everyone what offsides means.
Right. And like, if a lot of people say like skip past it, and then at the end of the session look it up. I'm like, does anybody remember to do that at the end of the session? Like to go back and look up that rule and then try to learn it then? I would rather learn it at the table in play to reinforce, because whatever rule you're looking up, it's a tricky thing, right? If you have to look it up, probably. So I would rather play it right every time than misremember and mislearn. But you know what? Your table's different than ours. So if that works for you, totally fine. But I like to just find the answer.
So the rule we looked up was specifically, if I remember correctly, your character's defenses.
Correct.
And then maybe there were some attack modifiers and stuff too. You built your own character. So often in a new system, we'll use pre-mades. You did use a template from the GM's kit, but then you still had some work to do over and above the template, like these defenses.
Right.
Did you enjoy on your own before the session building your own character?
I did. I made the character Ice Flow, who is a energy controller for ice and cold, kind of like Iceman from X-Men maybe, but he's like a parkourist and an athlete and an urban explorer and a daredevil, so it's kind of a fun twist to that. Yeah, I really liked how they had it laid out where it's like, here's a base character. How would you describe your character? Are they reserved? Are they hot-headed? Or are they somewhere in the middle? If A, pick this set of skills. If B, pick this set of powers. I really liked that. It was just the perfect level of we've picked everything for you. Choose at like 3 or 4 points which set of options you want based on your personality. And I really, really, really liked that.
Awesome.
So that was my prep. What was your prep like? It seemed like it was quite a lot.
I did a ton of prep. Yeah, I was bound and determined. Like, to your point, when you game for Tanner, you better know the system. Now, it turns out I failed miserably. But I put so much work into the adventure and into the encounters and into having my NPCs figured out and into having their math figured out. I put so much work into that because I was like, I'm running for Tanner. It's a new system for me. I gotta get this right. So I wrote a 4-page adventure, 3-column layout, quite small font, a lot of words. I did a lot of prep on my original adventure.
It showed. It ran awesome. So yeah, don't. It was not wasted prep, I would say, at least from my point of view.
No, I'm going to do the next session just like that. Prep that worked really well for me. So I shared this adventure with Tanner, so he might jump in and comment on some of the things that I built into the adventure. But I shared it with him after I ran it. I made a little encounter map for myself. The Hex Dungeon story structure has worked so well for me. It wasn't hexes. I made it like a comic book page, but I had a 1 panel at the top for the intro, and then 3 panels for 3 things that Tanner might do, and then 3 more panels for what he might do, and then 2 panels for, and then these are all rows. And I thought of it as Tanner moving from top to bottom. Mm-hmm. And whatever, scene he was on was almost like a room in the dungeon. And then I would just, flip to that scene and run that scene as he wanted to go ask this person or interview this person or fight this person. Those were all scenes in this top to bottom layout I had done. And it actually did keep me organized at the table. I was like, conceptually, I do a lot of dungeon crawls. How do you even run a comic book?
Sure. It reminds me kind of planning a mystery, and I know that we've waxed on that a long time and still not found any answers. But I love the framework of start with an inciting incident, spread out. You have a couple of things to check out. Maybe those lead to a couple things, but then it does all funnel into one answer at the bottom. That's sort of like, diamond shape of from top to bottom. You have a lot of different options, but you know what? There's one thing happening and they will lead you there. And the path that you get there and how you get there is the fun of the play.
That's exactly what I did.
Yeah. Awesome.
Encounters were so tough to balance. I don't have the GM Game Master's Guide in front of me, but I will say the advice for balancing encounters is very small and very paltry.
That's so weird for how combat heavy of a game this is. And maybe we feel that a little bit harder because we do just have one player character. And as we discovered, I picked like the most fragile player character class. So I wonder if maybe if you have like 4 players or 3 players, if there's just enough of a buffer that like you can kind of just throw anything at them. I don't know.
It's time to confess something to you, Tanner. We missed out on a whole game mechanic.
What? Are you serious?
Well, I am serious. I should have been giving you hero points.
Oh,
And hero points are this thing, like, you know how in Savage World you have bennies?
yeah.
It's basically a benny.
Hold on. Savage Worlds, they in the book they say, I think Savage Worlds is a UK written game, a British game, and they say we use the term bennies, a common American slang term for benefits. Have you ever heard the term bennies out like in that context?
You've never heard friendies with bennies? I'm joking. That's not a thing. I've made it up in this moment. I have never.
But yeah, I don't know. I would just love that in Savage Worlds. It's so confident that that's a word that Americans use all the time.
I feel like one of the guys who wrote Savage Worlds lives in North Carolina, actually, because I think he might live in the same neighborhood as a friend of mine.
Really? That's interesting. Well, we all know that North Carolinians have a very basic grasp of the human language.
Me included, me especially included. But yeah, hero points, you should have had those all along, which would have helped, like, some of those near-death experience. Like, you almost died.
Yeah.
I did not pull any punches. I don't recall pulling any punches, but you did almost die twice. Once in your encounter with Bubbles, and then again when the last villain hit you that one time.
Yeah.
You almost on that one roll, on that one damage distance roll, because you rolled so poorly, you almost took 4 degrees of failure in that moment.
Right.
But if you would have had hero points, you could have re-rolled some of that or soaked some of that or dealt with some of that. So I should have given you hero points. It would have made this much more survivable in the same way that Scarlet Heroes has Defy Death.
Interesting. But now you can look like a genius for introducing them in session 2, where you're like, Tanner, now you kind of got the rules down. I'm going to add hero points to this. Now you should have never said anything, because I would have thought that you were just being really smart and like teaching me the system as we go. But you ruined it. Yeah.
Back to the prep. The one piece of prep that I feel like I do feel like I got in counterbalance right, despite you almost dying. You're playing a glass cannon, so you almost dying, not a huge deal. So the mapping encounters worked great. Balancing encounters was fine. I missed out on hero points. That's not really prep. That's system mastery. The piece of prep that I screwed up, I had NPC names and I had NPC personalities. I didn't have as many place names. I found myself inventing place names like Century City Park or whatever. I was inventing that whole cloth in the moment. I really need to give every quote unquote room like a specific neighborhood, city, field, place name.
Yeah. I'll say it didn't feel like that. Century Park feels totally fine, but yeah, if that stressed you in the moment, that's a great call. And that's one of those points of friction that's like when you're doing all the work of making this scenario, that's one of those things that you're never going to find that out until you're in the moment where like, damn, I really should have named this park I'm in, So don't feel bad about that. I feel like that's that's a speed bump you only discover by hitting it, I think.
So what was the weakest part of the adventure for you? And then actually, let's do weakest part of the system, and then honestly, the weakest part of the adventure.
Yeah, the system is very fiddly, and we talked about this last time. It reminds me a lot of 4th edition D&D, which I am a defender of, I'll say, but it brings along all of like the +5, +10, +15 math that we talked about last time, and all the different like defenses. And like we talked about last time, the system as written is pretty dry. Like when I have a cool ice kick move I do, but what that is in the terms of the rules is like power, energy, projection 10, factor 5, damage 5. And like that's how that power is written. It's on the player and on the GM to put the pizzazz on that and put the flavor on it to make it feel like a comic book. So that's kind of the point of friction. And you know what? That's just like a philosophy of game design that many people love and has been valid for decades, which is the game should be numbers and dry, and it's on the group to add the fun and the flavor to it. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And then for the adventure, the weakest part, honestly, I was thinking about this for a long time. I'm having a hard time giving you an answer for this. I think the adventure was really tight and really straightforward, and I could see for a different player that might be very frustrating. But honestly, this is a session 1 in a new system, a new campaign. It's exactly what it should have been. It was focused. Like this game we played did not need the additional complication of me going off and doing whatever I wanted to. I didn't feel restricted. I was a hero or an aspiring, superhero. There were very clear villains set in front of me. I felt like it was made sense for my character to follow them. So it went A, B, C, boom, 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 all the way to the end. And it was fun. It was awesome.
Cool. I appreciate that.
Dusty, same question. What did you feel like from your side of the screen was the weakest part of the system or your adventure?
I love your analogy about it being like 4E, and I am also a 4E defender. I'm a guy who gave away his entire shelf and a half of 5th edition stuff, but by God, I still have my 4th edition stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't hate on 4th edition. I loved how it was a superb game for tactical miniatures combat. I think Mutants and Masterminds is a superb game for, I won't say tactical, but I will say well thought out and balanced superhero combat.
Mm-hmm.
So I like that about Mutants and Masterminds quite a bit. So therefore, what I don't like, I was missing all that 4E style combat encounter creation advice.
Oh, yeah. It was so good in 4E where it's like, here's your budget for an encounter, throw this many of this guy, this many of this guy, put a controller in there to mess them up, put this guy up in front to take some hits. It was so, the encounter guidelines in 4E D&D are so awesome. And it's a long conversation. They threw the baby out with the bathwater with that, I think.
They did. 5E was too much of a reversion, in my opinion, but let's not get into edition war. But it just felt like they put so much thought into the damage and combat that more than a paragraph or 2 paragraphs on balancing encounters would be nice. Like from memory, the Game Master Guide says, hey, every 2 levels you go up, the hero's about twice as strong. And then there's some really basic advice about an encounter being balanced. I did find an encounter builder online that I used to some extent, but for one hero that was also hard to balance. So
right, because then it just becomes like an action economy thing, and we've talked about that before with Scarlet Heroes and like the Frey die and stuff like that, where like at a certain point I can be 3 times stronger than everybody in the fight, but if they're taking 5 turns for every 1 turn I take, it kind of doesn't matter. Like action economy is so powerful in games like this,
and
honestly, yeah, it matters. And honestly, I'm gonna ding the game for this. If this game's goal is to be a involved superhero combat simulator, it should have rules for balancing encounters, like straight up. Like it should have way better guidelines than it sounds like it's giving you. This is what this is what the game feels like it's about. You know what I mean?
And the game, like if you look at the rule books, there's so many rules for building characters and so many videos for building characters and how to build this character and how to build that character, how to build this power. It's all about character and power building. Would love some encounter building. Anyway, as far as the weakest part of the session, I can't think of much about the particular session. The part where we looked up rules, probably, but that was still the system, not the session. So I'm also going to gloss over that one and say I think the adventure was just fine. What highlights? Let's reverse the question. What highlights for the system and what highlights for the adventure for you?
System-wise, I said this last time, but I love the mechanical difference between henchmen and like the tier of power that you are as a hero. Even I'm a starting hero, I'm like a street level superhero, but like the power of being able to take 10 on attack rolls against minions and just like start knocking guys out once a panel, like that's awesome. It was an excellent highlight of that. And then, for the adventure, I would say highlight number 1 would be your characterization of all the villains. The hot dog guy, what was his name?
Grillmeister Gus, who I grilled for information. Bubbles the Gigglemeister, your off-brand Harley Quinn. Like all the characters felt so... I'm not going to say 3-dimensional because I don't think they are. I think they're a really good 2-dimensional character for what they needed to be, which is a device in the story. You know what I mean? I was really inspired by the 1960s Batman show with how much each villain committed to their gimmick. Now, I made the gimmicks grittier.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't fight Grillmaster Gus, but if you would he have
grilled me?
His gimmick was throwing sausages at you.
Uh-huh.
Every time he threw a sausage, it would give you a -1 on your next roll because he might throw one right where you're about to step. So you step on a sausage and like it crushes and you slip. He might throw it in your face and it bounces off your eyes and doesn't do damage, but it gives you a -1 because now your aim's starting off or whatever. But he had this whole throwing sausages mechanic. I love how the 60s Batman, every villain and every villain's henchman were 1,000% committed to the gimmick.
It's a really incredible watch. Yeah, it's awesome.
So that inspired me as I was like, what if the 60s Batman was gritty? What if there was the same commitment to the gimmick, but the gimmick was a little bit grittier? Like Grillmaster Gus is like sweaty and covered in tattoos and hawking up loogies while he serves up hot dogs. And you really would not want to buy a hot dog from this guy.
No, that's so funny. And then the other moment I really liked was when I trivialized the final encounter, which I was fighting a giant robotic clown.
Mm-hmm.
And my character had an ability where I could transform into like an ethereal form, like an elemental form. So for a fire controller, that might mean literally turning into fire. I think we narrated it as me turning into like freezing fog, kind of. And the Robo Clown, was his name just Robo Clown?
Cyberclown. Much more advanced than RoboClown.
I'm sorry, Cyberclown. And Cyberclown just had no means of actually dealing damage to an ethereal being, and I just kind of smoked him. It was awesome.
You did, but
which is good because I would have died in that fight.
You almost did die when he punched you.
Yeah. So, and then I figured out, oh, maybe I should do this. Did that feel cheap or anything to you?
No, I loved it. Okay. I think that's accurate to comic books.
Yeah.
I think a lot of times Batman has a tougher time getting to the Joker, and then once he gets to the Joker's a pushover.
Yeah,
Batman knows 85 martial arts, and he can bench press 600 pounds. Like, I don't know if that's true, but whatever. He's strong and fit and trained, and the Joker is simply chaotic. So once Batman, A, finds him, and B, navigates through the Joker's clever traps, the Joker himself is not a challenging fight.
No, and that's fun. And a lot of games and movies have like tried to make him that, and it's always felt kind of stupid when that happens. Like the Batman like Arkham Asylum games where like the Joker injects himself with the Bane serum and becomes like the Incredible Hulk and you have to fight him. I'm like, no, the Joker should be punched and locked up. Like that's that's the fun part about him. Yeah. Same question. What were the highlights for you, both mechanically and in terms of the adventure?
The highlight of the system I'm still going to say is I love just rolling the 1d20. I think it's genius. I don't know why more systems don't do that. If we went straight into rolling a d20 and doing a delta to get the levels of damage versus rolling a d20 and then rolling another d20, that would be even more ideal. But there's something about the purity of you only need that one dice that makes this really fun at the table. Like, just it differentiates from D&D, and you feel like you're not playing. It's familiar enough with rolling a d20 and trying to roll high, but it's different enough that you open your mind to the whole superhero genre. It's genius. I love that.
Yeah, absolutely. What about your adventure? What is the highlight of the actual story we had?
I think the highlight for the adventure, it's all the combat encounters that you made social encounters. I just mentioned that you didn't fight Grillmaster Gus, and the reason for that is you talked to him and you nailed this like charisma roll. It's not called charisma; it's called like, I don't know, personality, whatever, social. I can't remember, but you nailed this social roll where Grillmaster Gus was convinced that you wanted to join the Carnival of Crime, and I was like, well, this isn't a combat encounter anymore. I guess Grillmaster Gus is a talker.
But the way you set your prep up, he was going to link to Bubbles or Cyberclown or any of the other things regardless. So your prep was flexible enough that it didn't matter that I didn't have to beat the answers out of him, you know?
I rolled with it.
Yep.
Yeah. And I love that when you did that, I had this moment where I was like, okay, just like in a dungeon crawl where the player can kind of do whatever they want, same thing. And that was a relief, and B, made me feel really good about you feeling comfortable in the adventure. Awesome. I was like, I'm not railroading Tanner. Perfect.
Excellent. So, do you think that this adventure is good enough that other people should check it out?
Hope so. And I've put it out there once. I put it out there in the Mutants and Masterminds subreddit. I linked to the PDF and asked for advice. And like one dude was like, looks cool. So I think I'm going to wait and write all three because I'm going to keep this prep was critical to me running a good session.
Yeah.
So I'm doing that again for when we run again. I'll do that again for when we run the third session. I think after those 3 sessions, I'll be done with Mutants and Masterminds forever.
Yeah, and that's fine. We had fun with it.
We had fun with it. I finally played these books that have been sitting on my shelf for 5 years.
One question I want to ask before we kind of wrap up is, we know we've decided that this is going to be a 3-part thing. So how are you going to treat part 2 differently than a part 1?
I'm really thinking about the Star Wars trilogy. I think you're going to find part 2.
Force Awakens, Rise of Skywalker.
Oh, absolutely. Those. Yes. No. A New Hope. Like Luke Skywalker went on a fun adventure and achieved success. That was this first session.
Mm-hmm.
I think you're going to find the second session to have quite a bit of a different tone. And I'm actually glad we're having this conversation because it might catch you off guard if you didn't know to expect that. But I hope to put your hero on his back foot in the second session. And then in the third session, I hope it really feels like a triumph when, and I will say if, because I'm not going to pull any punches, if you overcome all the things.
Excellent. Yeah, that's great to think about in terms of campaign structure too, right? We haven't talked much about this being maybe next time I'm sure we'll talk more about the campaigny-ness of this, right? But it's good to think about the context of what session 1 is in terms of what campaign arc you want to do. So yeah, thumbs up to that, man.
So lessons learned.
Yeah, lesson learned number 1, learning a system requires learning. Don't shy away from it. Taking time to figure out what you don't know about a system is the point of learning, you know? Like if you're learning to fix your car, you don't open up the manual and skip past the part that looks hard and then, well, maybe you do, and maybe you're a genius, I don't know. But, you know, the point of it is to get in there, dig into it, understand the system and learn it, and taking time to do it is okay. That's the point of what you're doing.
Absolutely. And I'm hitting on this again that we hit on earlier. I think looking at rules is fine. I'm imagining how frustrated I would be if I played Settlers of Catan with someone for the first time and we're like, wait a minute, you trade what for what? And they're like, we're having fun. Let's just fudge it and look it up later. Like, no.
Yeah, and people treat RPGs differently than board games. And I don't think that in like that example, they should be. These are games. They're rules. Like you and I both think that rules matter to games.
Yeah.
I think if you're listening to the show, you probably also agree. But, you know, there are groups who do play, you know, just 23 skidoo with it and just go on, but that's not us. So we got to play the way that we want to play.
Absolutely. Lesson number 2. If it's a new system, new campaign, new start to a new series of adventures.
Also the first time us playing together for like 6 months.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Keep it short and straightforward. Not so short as the quick start, but like keep it short and straightforward. And honestly, Tanner, when we started playing one-on-one, my takeaway was that one-on-one, we can get more done than a group.
Yeah.
So I feel like if I ran this session for a group, what we got done in 2.5 hours, I think, would take a group sessions? Like 5 hours. Yeah.
Yeah, easily. Because everybody has a different idea of what they want to do to the cyberclown and they got to talk about it. And I know the answer is turn to mist. So.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So keep it short, keep it straightforward.
Yeah. Lesson learned number 3, lean into the genre. You know what? The game may or may not always do that for you. The game might be dry, but the reason you're playing a new genre, we're playing supers. We want to lean into this genre that we both have some affection for. So, you know, don't lose sight of the main goal. If you're like, don't get your nose so far in the book that you're trying to learn these rules and you forget this is supposed to be a fun superhero experience. So yeah, take a step back, kind of realign what your goal is, and, your game will take off.
Thank you for listening.
Find us online at rpgllpodcast.com. Email us at rpgllpodcast@gmail.com. And find us on Blue Sky at rpgll.